Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Lottie and this is my November wrap up. December is in full swing in our house. I've got my Christmas jumper on today and I've also got my candy cane earrings in. And I am so excited for the Christmas period. But before we can dive into Christmas, I have to tell you all about the books that I read in November. November was a really strange reading month for me. I feel like I was just reading the same book for a very long time, and I kind of didn't get to as many books as I would have liked in November, but it's fine. It's the end of the year. This is why I didn't set a strict TBR for November, because I knew that I wasn't going to get to like a million books by the end of the year. So before I tell you all about the books that I read, I'm going to run you through my November stats. So I read 4 books in November, which is equivalent to 1,701 pages, which obviously is not as much as I've read in previous months, but again, it's fine, it's not a big deal. So that is also equal to reading 56 pages per day, which is kind of a goal that I have each day, to try and read at least 50 pages. I do try and strive more for 100, but I know that like I'm busy, I don't read as much as I would like to, so I try and read at least 50 pages a day to at least make some progress on the millions of books that are on my TBR. November was kind of a good reading month for me. If you look at my star ratings, I read 1 3-star book and 3 4-star books, which is obviously good because I read a lot of good books, but I didn't read anything that was great. Nothing really stood out to me in November. Nothing became a new favourite, which is kind of disappointing, but you know, we're at the end of the year. It's unlikely that I'm going to find a brand new favourite book at this point. If we talk about genre, I read a lot of fantasy books. I read 3 fantasy books and I read 1 horror. Though one of my books this month was kind of difficult to categorise for my statistics, which I'll tell you all about later. But yeah, it was kind of strange book to sort of fit into a specific genre. It didn't really fit anywhere, so I just put it into the one that I kind of associate it the most with. If we talk about formats, I read 2 ebooks and 2 physical books, so we had a good even balance there. And finally, for the age categories, I read 1 adult book, 2 young adult books and 1 middle grade, which again, this book was kind of weird to categorise for both genre and for age categories, so whatever. So let's dive into my reviews. So the first book that I finished in November was Straight On Till Morning by KJ Sutton. I rated this 4 stars. This is a adult romance retelling of Peter Pan. It's also the first KJ Sutton book that I've read. KJ Sutton is the author of the Fortuna Sworn series, which is like a high fantasy fairy romance series thing, and she released this book this year, so I kind of thought I would grab it, see if I like her writing, and then try her longer series, because I don't want to invest myself in something if I'm not going to like it. But I did really enjoy the writing of this. It's been so long since I read it now, so I'm trying to remember bits about it, but it's basically just a Peter Pan retelling told from the perspective of Wendy. Wendy meets Peter Pan, she goes to Neverland, things happen in Neverland, and there is a romance with Peter and Wendy alongside it. I don't really know the story of Peter Pan beyond the Disney film. It was a nice, refreshing way to see the story, since I only know the Peter Pan film and I haven't seen that in a really long time. But because it was a sort of retelling, there wasn't too much about it that really stood out to me. I really liked the way that KJ Sutton crafted the world of Neverland and sort of made it her own. It's got loads of these like mythical creatures like mermaids, and there was these bird things. Yeah. You've also got like the pirates, so like this book's version of Captain Hook was there. You've got like the Lost Boys and Girls, which were thrown in there as well. And I liked the way that KJ Sutton sort of changed things around to make it her own. The romance between Peter and Wendy was nice, but it kind of did feel a bit random in places. I didn't feel like they had very much chemistry, and Peter as a love interest was just so annoying. Peter as a character, I think in general, in the story of Peter Pan, is meant to be a bit of an asshole. He's this boy who never grew up. He is cocky and full of himself, and he definitely comes across that way in this book, and I could not stand him. He was so annoying and I really didn't like him, and every time he kept coming back to Wendy I was like, please just go away and let Wendy do her thing. I really didn't like Peter in this book. He really got on my nerves. Peter and Wendy are like 19, I think. They're around the age of 19, so they're still young, but they're not young kids, which is kind of what we know from the traditional story of Peter Pan. The thing about this book as well is Peter Pan, Neverland, it's got this sort of childish whimsy about it, where it's the place you go where you never grow up, and it's where you can be a kid and free forever, and you definitely get that in this story. But there's these very sinister undertones of Neverland. It really made my skin crawl at times, which I liked because it was different and I wasn't quite expecting it. I'm really excited to try KJ Sutton's Fortuna Swan series after reading this and see what she does with her own fantasy world, because I think what she did with this world of Neverland was really cool, and her writing is also great. So the next book that I finished in November, was the first book I started, but I put it down for quite a while, and it's Heir of Fire by Sarah J Maas. I have an entire spoilery reading vlog all about this book if you would like to see my in-depth thoughts on it and for me to go into detail with it. But I really did not like Heir of Fire. I rated it 3 stars. The ending brought it back for me, but the first 200 pages bored me to death. I soft DNF'd this book in the month because I just thought I cannot do this. I really struggled with Heir of Fire. So obviously this is the 3rd book in the Throne of Glass series, which follows Selena Sardothian, who is an assassin who has been captured into the salt mines. King essentially invites her to take part in this competition to become his champion so that she can free herself from the mines, but really it's more like selling herself to be the king's personal assassin. The story itself is taking a very different route to that original book, which I like because although the first book was okay, I'm very, very interested in the overarching plot of this series. But this book in particular felt very much like a filler book for me. There is not a lot that actually happens in Heir of Fire beyond Selena training for something, and it got very tiresome very quickly. This book also introduces a lot of new characters and new perspectives from different characters, which I know will be really important later on in the series and for the overarching plot of everything. But at this point, I only really care about what's going on with Selena, and to just randomly, or it feels very random, to introduce these characters that we've never seen before, really. It was very difficult to sort of get into their heads and to understand where they were coming from. So one of those characters is called Manon. She's like this sort of witch character, and at first I found it really difficult to follow her perspective because I was like, who is this person? Like, where's she come from? Why should I care about her? But she develops a relationship with... Is this a spoiler? I won't say who she develops a relationship with because it might be a bit spoilery, but she does develop this relationship, and the relationship between Manon and this other character I'm very invested in, and I'm really interested to see how their companionship develops. We are also introduced to the character of Rowan in this book, who I think is probably going to be the endgame relationship in this overarching series. Sarah J Maas is known for her romances, so I don't think that's too much of a spoiler if you haven't read this. And if you haven't read this, where the hell have you been? Probably the same place that I've been since this is my first time reading this series. I think Rowan and Selena are going to be endgame, so I am very invested in that, and I'm very interested to see where their relationship goes because I do enjoy the character of Rowan. The book overall was just very average for me. If I hadn't already got all of the books in this series, I probably would have DNF'd at this point. And Ro from Wandering Through Worlds did DNF this series at this book, and I can completely see why she did that because I just really struggled to get through this. The next book that I'll be reading in this series will be The Assassin's Blade, which is the collection of short stories set before Throne of Glass. So I'm sort of excited about that because it's going to be something a bit different, but I am a bit apprehensive to get to Queen of Shadows, which is the next book chronologically, just because I really didn't like this one. So I'm hoping that things get better for me. But the thing about this series is the books just get longer and longer and longer, and if it's just going to be pages and pages and pages of what feels like filler, I'm not here for it. So I really hope that this series gets better the further I get into it. So the next book that I read was my very first ARC, or advanced reader copy, which I was so excited about. So I signed up to NetGalley in November, which is a website where you can apply to read books before they're published so that you can review them. And I thought I would give this a go because I want to sort of read more, I want to know more about new releases, but also because I am now a librarian, I want to try and keep up to date with new books that are coming into the library so that I can recommend them to our borrowers. I've applied to read a few different books that are coming out next year, and then I saw this book and I thought I have to read that. It came out on the 1st of December and it is Thunderpaws and the Tower of London by Ben Housden. I think this is his debut novel, and it is a story all about a cat called Teufel, I think that's how you say his name, who lives at the Tower of London. And this was the book that was kind of really difficult for me to categorise. So I've categorised it as a middle grade and a fantasy, but it very much has different elements of it. It feels a bit historical, it feels a bit contemporary, it feels a bit thrillery, it's got action, but also for the age range, it kind of reads like a middle grade, but you could definitely enjoy this at any age. I really loved it, and it didn't feel like a kid's book, even though I definitely think you could read this if you were a child or you were buying this for a child. So the story of Teufel, he moves to the Tower of London with his owner, who is the tower's chaplain, and it's sort of just the story of what he gets up to. At the tower there are all these different ghosts that Teufel can communicate with, because there's this like thing that cats can communicate with ghosts, which I thought was really cool. And the Teufel finds out that he is destined to save the world, and it's sort of just the story of him saving the world and getting himself into all kinds of trouble. What I really loved about this book is, as a cat owner, it felt like it was speaking directly to me. Teufel is the sort of character where he is a cat. You can tell he is a cat, and there's this thing where I feel like with humanised animal characters they can feel less like the animals that they actually are, but Teufel, there is no doubt about it, he is a cat. He does things that are just like, as a cat owner, you would just get. So some of the things was like the way the author would describe the way Teufel was sitting, and you know when cats like tuck their feet in, their paws in, and they like sit up, and it's really hard to explain, but the way that the author described it, I could picture exactly what Teufel was doing. The way he would just like start washing himself when he was mid-conversation with a ghost, and his owners as well. At one point they gave him these tablets, and as revenge Teufel decides to throw up everywhere, and he's like, and that's for that, and that's for that, and it was really funny. I just really loved Teufel and the other characters in this. There are other animal characters in this book as well, but it was just a really fun and whimsical story with like this big epic plot in it, and it was just really funny, and I feel like everybody has to read this book. It is just fantastic. So I did rate it 4 stars. It wasn't quite like my new favourite thing, which is why it didn't quite get 5 stars, but I did really love it, and it is the first book in a series, so I'm really interested to see what happens next. I don't know if it's continuing on with Teufel or if it's going to follow a different character, but I'm really excited to see what happens in the next book. And another thing about this book as well is, if you are a fan of the BBC series Ghosts or Horrible Histories even, it feels like those series. Ghosts in particular, because it's about ghosts, but Ghosts is with the same cast as Horrible Histories, so you kind of get the same sort of vibes in this book as those series, which I really liked. I think if this was to ever be adapted, it should definitely be with the cast of Ghosts / Horrible Histories, because they would do a perfect job of playing the ghost characters in this. This was absolutely fantastic. So it came out on the 1st of December, and I really recommend you check it out. So the final book that I finished in November, I just about managed to finish in November. I finished it on the 30th, and this was The End by Charlie Higson. This is the final book in the Enemy series, which I have been reading. I worked out for about 6 years? 5 years. When did I start university? 6 years. I started this, no, when did I start this book? Not this book, this series. When did I start this series? I started this series the summer before I turned 18. So yeah, I started this series, I started this series 6 years ago. That was way too complicated to work out. So I'm so pleased that I have finally finished it. I did read the first book and then leave it a long time and then have to reread the first book and then continue with the series. So I kind of haven't been reading it for 6 years, but also I have. Anyway, this series is about a group of teens everyone's on the age of 14 in London in a post-apocalyptic scenario where everybody over the age of 14 has gotten this disease that has turned them into child-eating monsters. And it's just the story of these kids surviving and fighting the grown-ups, sickos, oppos. They have all different kinds of names. They are essentially like zombies, but they're very rarely called zombies because they're not the living dead. They are alive. They have just got this disease that has turned them into child-eating monsters. And I have loved this series. It's not been like an absolute favourite, but I love seeing how the kids survive. I love that it's set in London because I can definitely sort of picture everything as it's described. It takes place at many of the main landmarks in London. So you've got the Natural History Museum, Buckingham Palace, Hyde Park, the Tower of London, and it's just made me want to go to London just to see these places as they should be and not in a post-apocalyptic ravaged world where there are just children trying to look after themselves. So this is the final book. It's kind of difficult to talk about what happens in this book without spoiling the rest of the series, but this has basically the main final battle at the end where will the kids manage to defeat the adults or are they all going to get eaten? You'll have to read it. It was really good. It was exciting. There were times when I was sort of glossed over the action just because I don't do so well with action scenes and trying to visualize what's happening. It just sort of goes straight over my head, and I definitely prefer interactions between characters. There was a character in this who confesses to something basically, and that was really heartfelt for me, and I absolutely loved it, and it just made me love the series even more. What I like about the series is it feels very diverse, so you've got a lot of different characters in there of different races, ages, abilities, sexualities. It's got all of that in there with all the different kids, and I really liked that. Also, a lot of these kids are definitely like, they're really working class, so you get that in the way that they talk, and I quite like that as well, that you have that mixture of like working class kids, you've got a very middle class posh child who thinks he is the new king of London. You've got all these different mixtures of characters and the way that they all interact with each other. The main question I think of this series is like, who is the real enemy? Is it the adults who are all trying to eat you, or is it the other kids trying to fight each other? For a kids series, for a young adult series, it's really dynamic, and that's what I really like about it. Also, I've mentioned this before, this series is gory as anything. I am often very surprised that this is suitable for young adults, for teenagers, because this series, it's like The Walking Dead. If The Walking Dead was not a comic, not a novel, this is what it would be. This is like The Walking Dead for kids. I actually sometimes think this is worse than The Walking Dead, having seen only up to season 3 of the series, because it is just so violent. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I'm just very surprised that this is suitable for teenagers, for younger teenagers as well. It to be so graphic. It's very graphic. I rated this 4 stars if I didn't already say that. But yeah, it was a very good ending to the series. I'm so glad that I can finally cross it off my list and not have to worry about the next book anymore. For my favourite book of the month, I don't think I have one, to be honest. November was a very sort of adequate reading month for me, and nothing really stands out as a favourite. I would definitely say that my most disappointing book was Heir of Fire. I was so excited for this and it was such a letdown. And my most surprising book was probably Thunderpaws and the Tower of London. That was such a delight to read, and I definitely was not expecting it. So that is my short and sweet November wrap up. I felt like I should combine November and December because I'd only read 4 books this month, but 4 books is still 1 book a week, so I don't think I'm doing too bad. I think at this point I am on about 65 books throughout the whole year, which is way more than what my original goal was. So I'm doing very well and very pleased with that. So that's it from me today, guys. Thank you so much for watching. Let me know in the comments down below what you read in November and what your favourite book this month was. And also let me know if you have read any of the books that I read this month, and let me know what you thought of them. If you haven't already and would like to, please consider subscribing to see more of my videos. From January, I definitely want to try and do at least a video a week on my channel. I want to do more with this. I'm really loving doing the YouTube thing. And yes, don't forget to like this video as well if you enjoyed it. So that is it from me today. Thank you so much for watching yet again, and I will see you all very soon. Bye!